Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are joining us today, wherever you're joining us from, because I think it's quite late in some places. So thank you for joining us and welcome to this parallel session of the UN Food Summit's pre-summits, which is focusing on interlinkages between or among food security, climate risk and disaster risk, and human mobility. So we are not going to waste a lot of time with background information because we have only 50 minutes. Just to introduce myself, I'm Vasudha Vijayanaika. I work as the Executive Director of SLYCAN Trust, and SLYCAN Trust is hosting this session with the contributions of a lot of speakers who have agreed to join us today. So to give you an overview of this session, I would like to invite Mr. Dennis Mumbauer, who's the Director of Research and Knowledge Management of SLYCAN Trust. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dennis Mumbauer. I'm Director of Research and Knowledge Management at SLYCAN Trust. And so we have a great number of speakers today, but only 50 minutes for everyone to speak. So I will not take up too much time. After I am done, I think we'll go through the speakers and have them highlight what work they are doing that connects to climate risk, human mobility, and food systems, and why they think it's important to connect these things and not just look at them in isolation. So before we start that, I will give a very quick overview of the kind of work we do at SLYCAN Trust on this. So basically, we, on the one hand, we work on collecting evidence and getting a better understanding of how it actually looks, how climate mobility looks on the ground, how it connects to food systems, how it connects to climate risk and climate change impacts. And then on the other side, we work on the policy and legal and process level to try to see how these things are mainstreamed, integrated into policies and processes, and how it can be enhanced to better address these issues. So one country we work in is Sri Lanka, where we have done a great amount of work on human mobility in its different forms. We have done a case study in one of the farming areas in the dry zone, where farmers are very heavily affected by drought and other climate impacts, and that directly influences their decisions to migrate. So this is a clear connection between food systems, the farming livelihood that they have, and migration, and of course climate change. Then we have done a policy analysis, a policy brief on this. We have done a working paper based on stakeholder consultations that tries to go into more depth on certain sectors. How does it intersect with human health? How does it intersect with water resources and irrigation? How does it intersect with human-wildlife conflict and environment and ecosystem services? How does it connect to cross-cutting issues such as gender, youth, the elderly, special needs? How does all this connect and come together? And at the moment, we are working with support of the Sri Lankan Embassy in Kuwait on trying to analyze how labor migration, so basically foreign employment, is impacted by this, how climate change influences decisions to migrate abroad, and how this impacts the people migrating. And of course, all the people staying behind, family members staying behind, or those who cannot migrate or won't migrate, and even those trapped in case of disasters. So we look at all these different dimensions: migration, displacement, and relocation, and then the immobility, also staying behind. And we expand our work to other countries as well. For example, Ghana and Niger, where we work with country partners and partly the support of the government. One of our country partners is also here today and will talk about his work, Sunny. And basically, we're trying to do similar work that we did in Sri Lanka to establish country profiles on how human mobility intersects with climate change and also food systems, because agricultural livelihoods are a very big part of this equation. So that is one area we work in on the national level, but we also work on the global level. For example, recently we have published a briefing note analyzing how different forms of climate mobility are integrated into NDCs, the National Determined Contribution under the Paris Agreement, that have been submitted in 2020 and 2021, so basically the updated revised ones. And it seems to be that there's more integration now than there was in 2016 and 2018 when similar assessments have been done. It seems to be a growing concern, and more countries have at least acknowledged this as an issue. And some countries have concrete provisions for relocation, for dealing with displacement, and for dealing with migration. We will update this also shortly before COP26 with more input we received by then based on the NDC submitted in the meantime, because at this time, of course, only a limited number of countries have submitted the NDCs, less than half of countries. And we also try to engage with stakeholders on an international and global level, for example, through webinar series we did and online workshops, where we also try to highlight different cases and case studies, collecting the evidence, and then different aspects of it. For example, the rural urban migration and the rural urban divide, different perspectives on this, how it connects to issues of loss and damage and process on the scene of CCC, to the WIM and the task of displacement, and also how it connects to like different countries, different regions, different stakeholder groups. So you can find all of this in our Adaptation and Resilience Knowledge Hub. I put the link in the chat. I don't want to take up more time. I'm very interested to see how the other speakers work on this and what aspects they choose to highlight. I just think it's there's strong reasons to look at these things not in isolation but interconnected, and to try to address them in a comprehensive and holistic way that doesn't just address migration or displacement on its own, but puts it into a context of climate change, connected to food systems, connected to different sectors. Yeah, so thank you very much, and I look forward to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. So now we have Dr. Kukuwana from the UNFCCC, who will be following Dennis, and she will highlight the work of the UNFCCC and the interlinks between all three themes that we're focusing on. Coco, over to you.
Great, thank you. And just a sound check, all good?
Yes, we can hear you if you want it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Volsita and Dennis. I appreciate the introduction. And hi, everyone. My name is Coco Warner. I work at the UNFCCC, and for a long time, we've been wondering, where does human mobility fit into the range of climate impacts and what society is doing about climate change? Human mobility, migration, displacement, planned relocation is a set of ways, and there are many, many ways that people manage risk. So to take appropriate action in adaptation and resilience actions to get prepared for climate change, the central thing is to think about how people deal with risk. What do they need? What can be strengthened? And that's the central question that all of us are asking about adaptation. What do we need to do? So let me name three challenges really quickly. And Volsita, if it's all right, I would share one slide. Would that,
Yes.
Is that okay if I share my screen?
Yes, please go ahead. I hope you have permissions.
Yeah, okay. Let me go ahead and do that and tell me if you can see this. Okay, so this is a landscape, just make-believe landscape many of you are familiar with. This is something that we use in the loss and damage work stream under the UNFCCC, and we often show this landscape to people to help them think about what climate change and climate change impacts might mean for them where they live. So if you would just look at this landscape and imagine for a minute, do you live in a delta? Do you live in a valley, in a mountain area? What's your situation? And we use this landscape to help people understand what some of the impacts of climate change might actually mean. And that's what you see, these little round icons on the screen. Now down on the bottom, there are a number of additional societal factors. There are economic impacts, as well as non-economic impacts, such as health, human mobility. You see it's the third little square over there. Society has culture, all kinds of things, biodiversity, etc. So where does mobility fit in? Now, let me just give you a quick run through of 4 patterns of mobility that we see today. And then I'll conclude with a few comments about food systems and the Food Systems Summit. So the first pattern of mobility that we see, we refer to as displacement. And in displacement, often something happens that threatens people's lives or their assets, and they need to move really quickly. People go back as soon as it's safe to do so. Now, this next pattern often has to do with livelihoods. And in some areas where livelihoods are particularly sensitive to weather disruptions such as farming, such as pastoralism, etc. If climate, drought, heat disrupts livelihoods, families may choose to send one or more people away in order to secure their livelihoods. And often those people who move away, we may call these migrants, send back remittances, and those remittances help people at home continue to pursue their lives, keep kids in school, buy food for the family, pay medical bills. And one thing that's really important to recognize here is this pattern in particular is really important for our food systems. Migrants today make up a very large share of labor in international food systems and food supply chains. So not only do we need to think about migrants, we also need to think about the people back home that those migrants are supporting. There are two more patterns. One is complex movements. Some areas of the world already are torn by strife, political conflict, sometimes even armed conflict. And when climatic disruptions come, it can push people over the edge. Can they return? It depends on when it's safe to return. And sometimes these situations can be really prolonged. And the fourth pattern is something that we know least about. It's a little bit longer term. Planned relocation at best might reflect some of these things. But climate change is changing bit by bit the habitability of some areas of the world. And it's doing so in ways that come with a lot of surprises. You may hear from my accent, I'm from North America, and it's extremely unusual that you would have daytime temperatures approaching 50 degrees Celsius anywhere in North America, actually anywhere in the world. It's a very, very high temperature. And we've had these extremely high temperatures hovering very far north for a long time, as you've seen. Forest fires in other places of the world. And these things make it really a question of, can people stay? Now let me stop sharing my screen and wrap up. That's a quick tour of climate change and human mobility. But now the central question, what can we do? And UNFCCC is grappling with this question. Of course, we're right ahead of a Conference of the Parties in Glasgow. I hope many of you will be able to attend in person, and all of you will be able to attend at least in some other format. Let's see, we don't know yet what the format will be. But there are three things that need to happen. Countries need to come with ambition. When we talk about food security, that's mentioned in Article 2 of the Convention, of course, a central part of the main objectives of the Paris Agreement, and it runs through all of our work. We know that people manage risk with mobility, and we don't want people to be forced to flee. That's much development gains are lost. And that means at COP26, countries need to come with ambition. We need to see new NDCs that are much more ambitious and that keeps us well below 2 degrees and even better, below 1.5 degrees. In addition, institutions need to focus on building resilience, and that means bolstering food systems. I'll focus on soil in just a minute, but institutions for a long time had been built on the notion that the climate is stable, and that's not the case anymore. So institutions need to incentivize and foster and regulate and build the ability of societies and nature to offer people options. If people move, countries need options so that they can move internally or even across boundaries in a secure and regular way. That may mean rethinking boundary agreements. There's a lot that is shifting, and our systems need to evolve into that. Maybe enough said on that. And then a challenging but really important thing is a shift in what's normal and social norms. Are migrants integrated into the societies that they arrive in? And you may wonder, what does this have to do with climate change? But again, migration or other forms of human mobility are one of a number of ways that people manage risk. We're headed into a world of greater uncertainty, and more frequent and more magnitudinous or more large-scale risks. And people it needs to be seen as something of accommodating people who are just trying to manage the risks that they face. So what can we do? And this is the last thing that I'll say. In the Food Systems Summit, we know that many, many people across the world face food insecurity, and that is one risk associated with people on the move. Policies that foster regenerative agricultural systems, no-till agriculture, regenerating soils, including no chemical disturbance, and leaving crop residues on the land can help halt land degradation and rebuild soils, and that rebuilds livelihoods and gives people an opportunity to pursue their lives and to manage risk where they are. So just a few thoughts. I hope that hasn't been too ambitious of a tour, but I'm looking forward to a great food summit, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Warner. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. And just an announcement to all of you, we might not have a lot of time for question and answers. So if you have questions to the speakers, please do type them in the chat box, and I hope the speakers will be kind enough to answer them. So thank you again, Dr. Warner, and we will get back to you with the questions and comments section again. So now I will move to Mr. Duncan Williamson, who's a good friend of our food systems discussions. Duncan, would you like to introduce yourself and share your thoughts, please? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Vasita. Yes, my name's Duncan Williamson. I'm sort of the founder and director at Nourishing Food Systems, and we are Food Systems and Climate Change Advisory Organisation working with people such as Action Against Hunger, Chatham House, and Nourish Scotland. So just a couple of things I want I want to mention here in this debate. So in my work with Action Against Hunger, we're looking at food systems and climate change and how you can tackle these issues to deliver the goal for the organisation, which is zero hunger. And what we've been doing with that is recognising that climate change is a key component of migration. It's also a key component of conflict, which also causes migration, and also understanding that food insecurity and nutrition insecurity is another big driver behind migration, and how can we work to alleviate the pressures of that. So we work building resilient food systems based around agroecological principles, working with groups, whether it's in Madagascar, Sudan, Bangladesh, to explore the role of agroecology, market gardens in ensuring people have a variety of measures in place to ensure that they are food secure or can tackle and be more resilient to climate change. And all our programs are increasingly being built around having resilience measures in them. We're also working on transformative agricultural adaptation, which is recognizing that as climate change moves forward, some crops will not be able to be as productive as before or be as nutritious, or may not even be able to be grown anymore. So how can you work with communities to help them transition to the next form of agriculture, which will be more adaptive, more productive under these circumstances? So for example, we're looking at salination of rice paddies in Bangladesh, and can you help people move to sort of aquaculture to develop food security? And we're also very much working on the fact that we believe that any of this work around migration and climate change, we need to incorporate gender equality and gender empowerment, because women are the engine often behind delivering food security for communities and for families. And so their role needs to be recognised. They need to be empowered to make decisions, not just at the household level, but also at the community level and the local government level. And we are working to deliver climate justice and gender justice. And some of our thinking around this as well on a macro scale is, as a humanitarian organisation, we need to think about who we work with and work with new partners, not just working with the development organisation, our traditional partners, but working with environmental organisations and becoming less siloed in our approach, because there's still a major risk where different sectors, humanitarian, development, health, environment, are still very, very siloed. And we're saying we need to now get out of these silos and work closely together, which is something we've noticed is important at the global level as well, because you've got, as has been mentioned, you've got the Glasgow COP, you've got the Food Systems Summit, you've got the Nutrition for Growth Summit as well this year, and the Biodiversity COP. And all of them are relevant to this conversation we're having today. And so we need to think about them as 4 international events which are linked, and food is the golden thread that runs through all of them. And then if you take a step back from that, you also have as well as the Biodiversity COP and the Glasgow Climate COP, you have the Desertification COP. And again, all of them are linked and all of them need to be looked at together so the solutions are mutually compatible and not siloed. And then the other thing I'm going to quickly touch on as part of this is I work with a wonderful organisation called Nourish Scotland. Nourish Scotland was set up by a farmer in Scotland, and he set it up because he felt that a lot of farmers are not involved in the discussion. A lot of NGOs, a lot of governments talk about the role of farmers in delivering solutions, but they very rarely talk to farmers, and farmers are very rarely part of the discussion because farmers are really, really busy. And what we're doing at Nourish Scotland is something called the Glasgow Dialogues, where he's recognising that farmers are not speaking to local authorities and local community groups enough. And he's getting these dialogues together where you have farmers, all shapes and sizes, big, small, organic, industrial, coming together to speak to local governments, local communities, and also the people who live in urban settings, so they can start to build trust and develop relationships with each other to understand what each other needs and how they can work better going forward. And this is fundamental to the climate change and the food security debate, because our idea is that if you're going to deliver food security and climate change action, we know these are global issues, but the actual solutions are going to be locally led, local solutions for local authorities on the ground. So you've got to start thinking more in the local framework. And that's what these global dialogues are doing. And ahead of COP, we've got 20 dialogues happening around the world. And this is going to build to a global dialogue at COP26, where we are going to have at least 100 farmers and farming organisations speaking to local authorities, representing dialogues from all over the world, particularly South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we are hopefully going to send a message to the organisers of Glasgow COP26 and to other leading countries that if you're going to tackle climate change, you have to think about food security, you have to think about the impact climate change has on people, and you have to bring farmers and agriculture to the table to deliver the solutions, because they're going to be absolutely key to this going forward. So in a nutshell, what we're saying is you've got to start talking, we've got to bring the right actors to the table, and we need to start moving out of our silos to solve the solutions that we need. So different actors need to start working together. And I think that's very much what the CIFA and the SLYCAN Trust have been trying to do with this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. It's been great to hear the information that you've shared, linking with the thematic aspects and the technical work that Coco has been explaining in her presentation. And in our work in SLYCAN Trust, working with farmers at local level as well as national level, and also looking at adaptation profiling, like the national adaptation plans that are being developed in Africa and Asia, it's interesting to see how connected the issues of displacement migration are to food security, or rather food insecurity. And how this can be based on climate impacts that's on the agriculture sector. And some of the things that we have seen is like there's a gap in data access, information, to ensure that actions can happen on the ground in many developing countries. So our next speaker, who is from GEO, Mr. Stephen Ramage, will be speaking about the work that they do on data and spatial planning, which has a direct connect to this. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to hear Duncan talk about Nourish Scotland. I'm a Scotsman lost in Switzerland. So I work at GEO, which is the Group on Earth Observations, known as GEO for short. And it's an intergovernmental partnership working with 120 countries. And these are the GEO members. The role of GEO is to help countries understand the value and usefulness of Earth observations for research, policy, decision-making and action. And that's in the context of long-term sustainable development of our planet. By Earth observations or EO, we mean being able to use sensors in, on, or around the Earth to record and measure activity. This could be space-based or in situ data that's then freely and openly available for use. So in line with the nationally determined contributions, governments are required to undertake national actions on mitigation, including reporting, measuring and tracking the decrease in national greenhouse gas emissions, as well as on adaptation, including formulating, implementing the National Adaptation Plans, or the NAPs. And Earth observations can play an important role in both areas. For example, in the food security arena, we're working on a technical NAP guidance entitled Earth Observation-Based Agriculture Monitoring for Adaptation, Proactive Response and Enhanced Climate Resilience. The guidance will present experience from Uganda in implementing EO-based agricultural monitoring with a disaster risk financing component. So it goes back to that risk part that Coco mentioned at the beginning of our talk. The link between disaster risk financing and the NAP will be a key area for this audience, and it's a work in progress, which we hope to present also at COP26 in Glasgow. This work is led by GEO's flagship initiative on global agricultural monitoring, which is called GEOGLAM. And GEOGLAM was created in 2011 in response to the G20 Ministers of Agriculture. They had an action plan on food price volatility. So the goal of GEOGLAM is to increase transparency and improve food security by producing and disseminating relevant, timely and actionable information on agricultural conditions at different scales. So again, what Duncan was talking about on that sort of global to local, that's very much a part of this work. So GEOGLAM monthly reports consist of several key components, providing overviews of the conditions of the observed crops. By crop for AMIS, the Agricultural Market Information System, or by region for the Crop Monitor for early warning. They provide an indication of crop conditions and the drivers of crop conditions. And then there's a synthesis that indicates the condition of all crops in a single map, as well as individual crop maps for individual crops and planting seasons. We also have case studies working on COVID, flood, drought, and locusts simultaneously. Also on the mitigation aspects, GEO is jointly undertaking a study on the mapping for greenhouse gas monitoring from space with the World Geospatial Industry Council. This aims to create an inventory of Earth observation satellites and their capabilities to monitor greenhouse gas emissions from space. So based on the Forum on Innovation and Remote Sensing Technologies for Accelerated Climate Action, which is part of the Race to Zero and on the road towards COP26 with the COP Climate Champions, EO provides specific opportunities to support national governments in the implementation of their NDC mitigation targets. In this context, EO companies are innovating through satellite constellations with continuous monitoring and increasing number of satellites specifically built for climate action. However, there's still room for innovation from the private sector, and there's also a need for governments to continue to finance such innovative initiatives, both in the public and the private sectors. Coco talked about food supply chain and the role of migrant workers, and I just wanted to give a perspective in terms of human mobility. The Rights Lab at the University of Nottingham in the UK has been using satellite technology to identify migrant settlements. So they've been working with Greek authorities to develop a decision model which they could prioritise high-risk victims. The Rights Lab combined different data sources and methods to build a set of criteria to measure labour exploitation in settlements. This was validated, the criteria were validated with a government agency and a non-governmental organisation who were involved in fighting labour exploitation. The EO data, the Earth observations, was combined with the operations management techniques to address the extent of labour exploitation in strawberry fields. So according to researchers, fighting labour exploitation in the agricultural sector requires time-intensive fieldwork as it involves visiting suspected farms and informal worker settlements, which governments and humanitarian organisations often lack the resources to do. Using remote sensing for real-time data collection allowed the academics to overcome one of the major obstacles of research in humanitarian operations, namely the difficulty of accessing data due to safety and logistical issues limiting access to the field. Back to the UNFCCC and climate action, Earth observations is referred to as systematic observation, and systematic observation of the Earth's climate system plays an essential role in understanding changes in the climate system, as well as projecting future changes, which are fundamental for informing climate policy making. So if you saw the image that Coco put up, that's very much the areas that we're working in. Articles 4, 7, 8, and 14 of the Paris Agreement provide additional information relating to systematic observations. GEO also has some case studies on global wildfires and global water sustainability in the annual State of Climate Services report, which is published annually by the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization. And finally, we're present each year at the Climate COP to support the 100 countries, well, the 100 plus countries that are members of GEO, and we're already planning our work for Glasgow. GEO is also hosting a public climate policy and finance workshop in September 2021, ahead of COP26, to bring some of these topics together. So thank you for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. It's interesting to hear some countries that we've been working on that you are working in as well. Uganda was one country that SLYCAN Trust worked with partners to develop a NAP profile. So there was a data gap that was highlighted, and also the fact that you brought in human rights and labor rights, which is a governance issue that we need to all focus on, because we're focusing on climate and also COVID-19, just transition, these aspects all being brought in to this discussion would enhance all our focus on what we're going to do in addressing climate security. Thank you very much, Stephen. We'll get back to you in a bit with questions. Now we have Sani Ayuba, Mr. Sani Ayuba from Niger, who's also working with us on human mobility and adaptation work, and he does a lot of work with youth. So Sani, thank you for joining us. Over to you to share your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosita. Good morning, everyone. So thank you for letting me to participate to this event. For me, the topic is very important. When we see here in Niger, West Africa, and in our Sahel region, the issue of food system and migration and climate change is very on the key perspective of the community, because we have, like, when we talk about the migration is we can see it as a adaptive response for the climate change impact, because the majority of our community are living in rural area. And when we see people, more than 70% of the population are living in rural area. So the main activities for those people are based on animal husbandry and agriculture. So, and the agriculture is based on the rainy season. In Sahel area, the rainy season is almost 3 months, depending on the year. And those times, due to the climate change impact, sometimes we just have like 2 months. So it's not easy for the farmer to have enough food to feed their community, their family. And we have this issue of population growth. So all the small farmers like that we have, they have like a bigger family. So they can see some time the migration as like a response for them to move, to go sometime in urban area, or to go far, just to find something that they can send back to their family to feed them. And the issue of the climate change, when it's come to talk about it, it is like we have a large impact of deforestation. We don't have enough trees, but we're still cutting trees. So this issue of deforestation allow also increase the vulnerability of the community, increase the vulnerability of in rural area. But the important thing when we analyze the situation is that in those areas, the issue of climate change allow community, when you see the depending to the population goal, we have like the disaster risk, that those time it's sometimes we have facing to floods, sometimes we are facing to drought. So all these issues increase, as I said, the community vulnerability. But what it's going on actually is that in some rural area, the issue of land, because the majority land are degraded. So sometimes thanks to some partner or some community initiative that allow them to try to work on the land degraded, to see how they can maybe put trees, all those things, to have like a land that can allow people to do their farming activities. And also this climate change impact also have an issue of the seeds that people are using, because how we can use like a small land to have a good production. So that's why an organization like ours try to improve the community knowledge, give them more skills, and to use the agroecology tools, and also the fertilization of their land. But sometimes they don't want to change because change is the process. They want to use their, in terms of sovereignty, they want still keeping their traditional knowledge or their traditional seeds in this process. So for us, it's very important to see how this migration can be used as like seasonal or temporary, not permanent, but response to the climate change issue. But the issue of adaptation, migration, so when it's come, because recently we started a kind of studies with SLYCAN Trust that allow us to collect more data and to see the disparities that we have between some area in the same country. You can see in other regions the reason why people leave their community. Sometimes we can see, depending the food, when it's come to have a kind of situation for hunger or a bad situation for food system, people still in their community and try to develop some kind of strategies to stay, not to move. But in the majority case that we have here in Niger, two reasons that allow people to move, to go in a rural area or in other countries. The first of them is like this issue of food. When the rainy season is very bad, when they are facing to a kind of flooding or drought, they don't have enough food to feed their family that's bigger, so they have to move. The other issue that we have in terms of human mobility is the issue of security, because you know that we have around several countries that are not in war but in trouble with this extremism group. So people, for their own security, they have to move and leave everything that they have in their community. And in the past also, in our country, people have this tradition to move every year after the rainy season to go, because they want to save what they produce in their land for the next coming month. Because as I said, we have just 3 months in the year for the rainy season. So after these 3 months, what they produce will not be enough to feed their family. So is the response we have this climate change that still increase the vulnerability of the community. So they have to live in terms of adaptation to find something to stay in life. And in other issue, the food system, we don't have enough infrastructure to develop when it's come for some community to have enough production to sell them or to develop a kind of business based on this. So that's why here in Niger, we call the agriculture is just for the community, for their own use. They don't have enough production to sell or to develop a kind of business in agriculture. That's my
Sorry,
thought.
Sunny. Sorry, I had to interrupt you, but we have 10 minutes more. So it's a very short session, but it's very interesting, the examples you brought in. And like Sunny mentioned, we'll be having a validation workshop for the drafts of the human mobility work that we're doing in Niger, and also looking forward to working with farmers and agriculture sector as well as the authorities in Niger in working on these issues that we're focusing today. If any questions are there for Sani, please do share in the chat box, and Sani, please do share more examples and input in the chat box as well. And we'll carry forward this conversation beyond this session as well. Thank you, Sani. And I'll quickly move to the next two speakers so that we have enough time for them as well. Now I'll move to Mr. Laksiri Nanayakara, who's from the World Food Program. If you can hear me, could you please? Yes, thank you very much. So if you could.
Yes, Wasita, I assume that you can hear me. So just a test.
We can hear you, Mr. Nanayakara.
Excellent. Yeah, actually, I will not take much time because the previous speakers mentioned up to the point on the most of the valid points that we need to discuss today and in this dialogue. But I would like to quote a little bit about the disasters and also the what are the consequences of disasters because of climate change, because climate variations is the root problem of the disasters. I will use two examples, like from World Bank. One is 89% of the 1.5 billion population in the lower and middle income countries are exposed to floods. This is actually one of the references from World Bank. The other one says the climate change could push more than 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2030. So these two quotes seriously shakes me to see what would be the consequence if we don't take right action, right time. So actually, as per the previous speakers as well, I see that the right action and the right dialogue about climate adaptation and mitigation is quite important. And if we don't take right action, even it will be very serious, because at the moment, even the rate of increase of temperature is at beyond of our control, and also the repercussions or the results have been really beyond our level of interventions to mitigate the risk as well. So in terms of climate change impacts, I would take few examples from the countries where I have been working with, actually, one in Sri Lanka and one in Bhutan. Mainly, you heard Bhutan is a very beautiful country, a mountainous region, have a lot of green forest cover, more than 60%. But in fact, the risk is the migration to the urban centers because of the impacts of climate change. This is actually an invisible vampire that I see as a climate change impacts, because most of the rural livelihoods are diminishing as a fact that most of the livelihoods, they cannot continue, or the younger generations with youth, they are not really willing to continue these livelihoods anymore, because the food systems or the systems were not really productive for them. And I remember even Duncan and Coco mentioned about the productivity, because if you see the global productivity, especially for lower and middle income countries, will really experience a huge loss of production or the total volume because of the lack of productivity, and which is serious again when it comes to increased populations, because the population is still increasing in these countries. So how do we tackle these two issues? Because one or the other is like more opposite, like how we can really tackle the increasing the food demand with the decreased food productivity. So we need to think about food systems, and they are really important for us also to reduce post-harvest losses and also damages and also handling. In terms of migration, which is also a very prominent issue that we need to take and tackle by right now, because as far as I see in Sri Lanka and other countries, people tend to move to the urban areas, assuming that the services sectors and other sectors would be the better livelihoods or the diversified livelihoods. So in terms of diversification, how do you really ensure the food demand is addressed while the people diversify their livelihoods is another matter of concern. So with all these, I would really recommend 3 areas to look in back as closure. Like, one is climate smart primary production is a key for countries like Sri Lanka and Bhutan and other countries in Asia, and integrated land use management and planning. This is also one of the very important aspects. And last one is improved livelihoods, or improved rural livelihoods, I would say, because to ensure that farmers or the rural livelihoods are secured enough to sustain their livelihoods, enabling them without moving to another livelihood or migrations. So with that, I would like to conclude my my speech here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Naikara. Thank you for joining us. Now we have Shalini Marasinghe, who's the co-coordinator of the Global Youth Forum on Climate Change. We'll be speaking about her experiences in working with farming community youth and also human mobility. Shalini, over to you.
So hello everyone. So I would give some insights from the youth perspective. As the global population has been rapidly increasing day by day, feeding the world has become a severe challenge now. So to address this challenge and to ensure food security, new technology, innovative solutions are required. In the meantime, climate change also impacts on food security while affecting agricultural production, and we face threats to food insecurity which affect the lives of millions of people. So I think you are aware that it has been predicted that by 2050, the world population will have increased by 2.5 billion, and that majority of them belongs to developing countries. And it is important to note that half of this population will be youth. So this highlights the huge threat that climate change and food insecurity have on youth. So the difficulties faced by youth who are from the agricultural families, including those who belong to traditional agricultural families, tend to migrate to urban areas for other income sources. In our work at SLYCAN Trust and research conducted with farmer community and youth, we have been informed that youth find it not the preferred career option to continue farming due to the vulnerabilities of the profession and the frequent climate and disaster threats faced. So youth who migrate in search of work to cities could face difficulties in fulfilling their nutritional requirements or achieve food security. Some of them are not skilled in a different vocation and face difficulties to find stable employment. Uh, so in terms of this, the creating awareness, developing innovative solutions, influencing youth engagement for sustainable food production are significant to address the upcoming challenge of food insecurity. And I think it is also important that climate-induced human mobility is addressed effectively through planned mechanisms and policies which focus on youth in a comprehensive manner. Uh, at the Global Youth Forum on Climate Change, uh, it is a forum which is led by SLYCAN Trust and has the engagement of youth across the world, focuses on youth engagement in food systems, addressing climate risk. So this forum also contributes to research and strategic action at national and global level on climate-induced human mobility. So we would like to invite all of you to join the next phase of activities, the Global Youth Forum, and contribute to engaging and empowering youth to implement solutions to address climate change. Thank you.
Shalini, so as all of you know, Food Systems Summit has a key focus on youth as well. And we are also looking at developing a national climate change strategy which focuses on youth in countries. So like a draft that could focus on youth, and then this is one of our key focus areas as well. Nasha, so we take 2 minutes to request Rangita, who's from IOM, who has joined us. Rangita, if you can quickly add a few points, and then we'll go to the closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vasita, and thank you very much, SLYCAN, for inviting me for this. As well said by my other colleague, Laksiri from WFP, so there is some sort of a connection between the climate risk and the food systems, and also it leads to human mobility at times. So especially during these vulnerable situations when extreme events do take place, people are further vulnerable. I mean, they might seek sort other means and means of mobility. For example, now we have seen, as the migration agency, we have seen with this fertilizer issue in Sri Lanka, that how these communities, farmer communities, they are trying to make their life in other sort of jobs and skill set, and they are trying to move into other sectors of jobs, as well as to irregularly seek migration options to other countries, especially during this COVID-19 era, where human smugglers are actually lying and promoting that there are many options around the world that they could migrate and have a very quick and safe earning. So there are repercussions of such, and I think it is because of the lack of understanding of these people on how to build a resilient life. As my colleague Laksiri correctly mentioned, building resilience among these communities would be very essential because of that. So right now IOM is also like supporting to build climate resilience through agriculture means, through a project where we study on migration, environment and climate change, whether this nexus is available or not, as another building like another step of the previous study that we conducted with FAO and WFP in 2018. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Please send us any queries if you really want to hear from us later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rangita, for joining us in between meetings and whatnot that's happening. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. A big thank you to all the speakers who joined us today in different time zones. Rangita, somebody's screen is on. Is it Rangita's or is it Sinasha's? Okay, thank you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for everyone working on the back end of making this possible. And a big thank you to all the participants who joined us. Do write to us. Sinasha, if you could share our email address, please feel free to write to us, asking questions. And we look forward to working with all of you and also to a very successful Good Summit. Have a nice day wherever you're joining us from. Bye from us now.